We are told that the faithful man Enoch chose to walk with God. So when he was threatened, he looked to Jehovah for security. On the other hand, Lamech, a descendant of the murderer Cain, opted to provide his own security. This led to killing a man in supposed self-defense. Now, Enoch and the killer Lamech both lived in a violent world, but their violence reaction plans were totally different. As we descend deeper into the last days, people will become more desperate and violence will only escalate.
We're watching Gary Breaux, a helper to the service committee. He's giving a talk titled Imitate the Faithful, Not the Faithless. Enoch, not Lamech. In fact, we are in a symposium where different good Bible characters are contrasted with bad Bible characters. And in this particular instance, it's not really working, or I find the entire premise of this part of the symposium kind of cringeworthy. If you go to Genesis chapter 4, verse 23, it says, Then Lamech composed these words for his wives Ada and Zillah. Hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Give ear to my saying. A man I have killed for wounding me, yes, a young man for striking me. If 7 times Cain is to be avenged, then Lamech 77 times. It seems based on this random poem attributed to Lamech, this entire talk has been structured with Gary Breaux summarizing Lamech as follows.
On the other hand, Lamech, a descendant of the murderer Cain, opted to provide his own security. This led to killing a man in supposed self-defense.
Is it just me, or is Gary Breaux reading an awful lot into what amounts to just a throwaway poem? We don't really know any details. All we know is, according to this poem, again, if we take it all at face value, which we shouldn't, but taken at face value, it's just a poem about someone reacting to someone attacking them and killing them. And based on this poem, with, again, no details, Gary Breaux is condemning this Bible character called Lamech for not trusting in Jehovah enough. He wasn't faithful enough, because if he were faithful, he wouldn't have acted in self-defense. He would have, I don't know, presumably allowed either himself and or his family to continue to be attacked and potentially killed by whoever was assailing them at a time when there wasn't law enforcement, there weren't police to appeal to. It was every man for himself. Anyway, this is the Bible verse the organization has chosen to invoke in essentially reminding Jehovah's Witnesses that they are pacifists. They must not in any way, shape or form resort to violence themselves, even when it comes to self-defense.
In the following dramatization, let's see how reacting to violence could suddenly become a personal test of faith in Jehovah.
Llama Enrique, llama Enrique. ¿Qué pasó? ¿Qué coge una toalla?
My son barely escaped the gangs. Again.
¿Quién te hizo eso? ¿Qué te pasó?
Me caí, estaba corriendo,
¿Estás bien?
tratando de escapar.
We're the only ones without a gun. I don't want to keep a gun for protection.
Estamos bien.
But how else can I protect my family?
In today's violent society, even in the perceived safest of neighborhoods, we could have a similar experience. If so, how can we imitate Enoch's faith? For one thing, he recognized a simple but fundamental truth. Jehovah hates violence. So for us to walk with God as Enoch did, we must reject violence as an option. What can help us to do that? Don't harbor retaliatory thoughts. Violent thoughts can lead to violent actions without thinking about the consequences. Learn to recognize situations that could harm us, then act to avoid the danger. That's the counsel given at Proverbs 22 and verse 3. The shrewd one sees the danger and conceals himself, but the inexperienced keep right on going and suffer the consequences. So we're encouraged to conceal ourselves if we sense danger. Think ahead, look around, be perceptive, and avoid situations that may become violent. Avoid violent entertainment. Why? It frequently portrays a violent response when a character's safety is threatened. All sorts of objects or weapons are depicted as strategies to kill or overpower the opponents.
This, for me, is yet another example of Jehovah's Witnesses having their lives micromanaged. In this case, they are being reminded that they are not to resort to violence, even in self-defense, or in this case, as portrayed in this dramatization, by considering having a weapon or a gun in your household as a last resort in case you are attacked. And don't get me wrong, I have my own opinions on guns. I happen to have grown up in a country where there were gun restrictions. I feel societies that do regulate gun ownership are safer, including the one I live in now, Croatia. If everyone has access to guns and there are almost no restrictions whatsoever, almost inevitably bad things are going to happen. I feel that's what we're seeing at the moment in America. But that aside, if you're living in a lawless country rife with corruption and violence, it should be your decision as to what steps you take to protect yourself and protect your family. But Jehovah's Witnesses are not being dignified with the freedom to make this call themselves in this video. This video is all about shaming any Jehovah's Witnesses who, in the situation depicted, do decide to take reasonable measures to make sure they have some fallback option in case they are attacked. Rather than simply leaving it to Jehovah's Witnesses to navigate these issues for themselves as adults, Gary Breaux wants to micromanage them or wants to point to the organization's advice, which in this case is to conceal yourself.
Learn to recognize situations that could harm us, then act to avoid the danger. So we're encouraged to conceal ourselves if we sense danger. Think ahead, look around, be perceptive, and avoid situations that may become violent.
Oh, why did no one else think of that? Yes, who needs guns when you can simply indulge in some kind of hide-and-seek game? It's all about concealing yourself. If only everyone could realize this is the way out of the whole gun debate. When you have an armed shooter or you have someone threatening your life, you just run away. Find a tree or a shrub to hide behind. Maybe dig a hole and cover yourself over. Build a bunker. Do whatever you can to get out of harm's way, because then you're smarter than everyone else who hasn't thought this through like Gary Breaux has with his profound wisdom about running away and concealing yourself. And to be serious for a moment, I've tried this advice. I can remember being brought up as a Jehovah's Witness and going to school and routinely being bullied, mostly because I was a Jehovah's Witness. It got to the point where I was literally being chased around the school property by this particular gang of bullies. And when I got home from school and I'd be crying to my parents about it, they would always be reciting this thinking, well, you can't defend yourself, Lloyd. You can't fight back. You've just got to run. And the way it was explained to me was this: if they chase you into a corridor where there's no way out, there's just 3 walls, and you're at the end wall, and they're coming in, you're completely sealed off, there's no escape. What you need to do in that situation, Lloyd, is figure out a way of climbing that wall. That's the way it was explained to me by my parents. And we can see where they got such ridiculous thinking from. It's from this organization that micromanages people to the extent of saying, you don't get to defend yourselves. You have to find any solution whatsoever that doesn't involve violence, because if you react with violence, even in self-defense, this means that you're not faithful enough. And am I the only one who finds it incredibly hypocritical for Gary Breaux to be going on about violent entertainment?
Avoid violent entertainment. Why? It frequently portrays a violent response when a character's safety is threatened.
Avoid violent entertainment. Yes, that's an interesting thing to be saying at a convention of Jehovah's Witnesses where you've just shown a violent film with guns being fired and a scary situation, and children are having to sit through this. As I've repeatedly said, there's no opt-out for young children. They have to sit through with their parents and watch that gun being fired in the street and this incredibly scary situation. They have to sit through this video, and they have to sit through all of the other videos in this convention which are not age appropriate. We've already had in the Friday morning Uncle Tony in Uncle Tony's story time describing rape, describing the materialized angels forcing themselves on women. Children have to sit through this. And Gary Breaux is here talking about the need to avoid violent entertainment. Well, isn't it his bosses, the governing body, who need to be thinking along these lines, who need to be thinking about the extent to which they use violence in their propaganda material, as evidenced by the fact that, by their own admission, parents of Jehovah's Witness children have been writing in and complaining.
We might mention that we've had just a few parents write in expressing concern that some of our videos depict scenes that could have an effect on children who've been protected from anything even hinting at an act of violence.
The concern expressed is that some scenes could have an effect on children who've been protected from all negative circumstances on TV, including daily news reports of catastrophes being faced by real people. Parents need to give their children a realistic idea of what we will face in the near future.
We don't feel comfortable watering down the inspired insight that Jehovah has preserved for the benefit of true worshipers.
Be assured that the governing body is not trying to scare anyone.
So when it suits Tony Morris and Stephen Lett and the rest of the governing body, violence is okay. Because, look, we're just being realistic here. We don't want to water down what the Bible says about God's judgment. So we insist, Jehovah's Witness parents, we know better than you do. We insist that your children sit through our depictions of violence in our conventions. They have the gall to essentially say this to parents and adopt this incredibly we know better than you attitude, while at the same time, in Gary Breaux's talk, saying, oh, of course, we'd want to avoid violent entertainment.
In the following dramatization, note how our brother imitates Enoch's example.
Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Faith is the assured expectation of what is hoped for. I do have faith in God's promises, but if a gun is what I need to protect my family, won't Jehovah understand?
esposo? ¿Dónde está tu esposo? ¿Dónde está tu esposo? Dámelo, que aquí ya no vas a poder hacer nada. ¿Cómo que no vas a hacer nada? Voy a poder hacer algo.
¿Estás bien, Pa?
No, I couldn't do that. I'm not the first to face a violent world. Hebrews 11:5 received the witness that he had pleased God well. Enoch lived among extreme violence, but he walked with God. I can imitate his faith.
Did you notice this brother's violence reaction plan? His faith in God's promises helped him to look to Jehovah for security instead of a gun. He realized he was not the first to face a violent world and made the firm decision to imitate the faith of Enoch. In this way, even if we find ourselves in a violent situation, our violence reaction plan will allow us to imitate Enoch and please God well.
This is what it means to be a Jehovah's Witness. You do not have the freedom to make your own decision when it comes to your personal protection. And I've shared my views on the need for gun regulations and how beneficial they are in curbing gun violence. But that's really a separate argument to what should be done if you happen to live in a society where there aren't gun restrictions or where gun restrictions are policed poorly. What do you do? That has to be everyone's individual decision. That has to be your call if you have not only yourself but a family to think about. I mean, imagining myself in that situation where guns are rife and I've got children, I probably would have a gun. I'd want to take whatever steps are necessary to make sure my family has a fighting chance of survival if I were unlucky enough to live in that sort of society. But as Jehovah's Witnesses, you don't have that freedom. You're shamed into thinking that you're lacking in faith if you're in any way violent, even if it's self-defense. And to add insult to injury, they have the gall to complain about violent entertainment while at the same time playing incredibly scary, triggering, violent videos that are not age appropriate for an audience in which the attendance of children is mandatory.